The universe, as the inhabitants of Tirana knew it, began to flicker. A series of strange, unsettling disturbances rippled through the fabric of reality. Each moment stretched and distorted as if time itself had started to unravel. Citizens of the sprawling cities, once proud of their world's stability, felt a sudden unease in the air. The usually predictable flow of time now oscillated erratically, and in the heart of the capital, a massive storm brewed, a temporal rift that tore through the streets of Starhelm. Buildings began to twist in impossible ways, collapsing into each other, caught between past, present, and future. The High Council of Tirana convened in haste, an emergency session called to address the growing anomaly. This was no ordinary disturbance. The council knew the whispers had become more than just rumors. The Nexar were here. From another dimension entirely, this advanced alien race had long sought to manipulate the very nature of time and reality. Their goal was simple: control the quantum fabric of the multiverse and enslave all who resided within it. The Nexar had found a way to breach the borders of Tirana's protected dimension, and with their arrival, the delicate balance of existence itself was in jeopardy. At the forefront of the council stood Captain Alara Quinn, a seasoned warrior and the most decorated officer in the Terran Defense Force. She had always been known for her unflinching resolve, her uncanny ability to think several steps ahead, but even she could sense the gravity of the situation. The flickers in the fabric of space-time were not mere anomalies, they were a signal. The Nexar were attempting to breach the nexus between dimensions, and their first target was the quantum nexus, the heart of Tirana's reality. Captain Quinn, the council leader, a stoic figure with silver hair and sharp eyes, addressed her. "We need you to find the gauntlet. The quantum gauntlet. It's our only hope of countering the Nexar's invasion." The mention of the gauntlet sent a shiver through Alara. Ancient and powerful, the quantum gauntlet was a relic thought lost to time. It was said to hold the power to bend the flow of time itself, capable of reshaping the multiverse. But its true potential came at a cost. Using it could destabilize realities, tear apart the threads of existence. Many believed it was too dangerous to use. "We can't afford to wait. If the Nexar are truly destabilizing the fabric of our reality, we have no choice," Alara replied, her voice steady but filled with determination. "I'll find it." The council gave her the coordinates, an ancient temple located in the hidden reaches of the Terran wilderness. It was a place untouched by time, protected by generations of guardians who had vowed to keep the gauntlet hidden from those who might seek its power. The journey would be perilous, but Alara knew she had no other choice. The Nexar were relentless, and with every passing second, their influence spread like a disease through the very core of reality. As Alara boarded her ship, a feeling of unease gnawed at her. The world she had known, the reality she had always trusted, was slipping away. What she was about to do could either save them all or lead to the end of everything. But there was no turning back now. The storm in the sky raged on, a reminder of the battle she was about to face. Alara set her course, and with a final glance at the crumbling city below, she plunged into the unknown, toward the only hope that remained for Tirana. Alara's ship cut through the unstable layers of reality as she neared the shattered nexus. The coordinates the council had given her led to a realm that should not exist. It was a place where time, space, and memory collided in chaotic disarray, a dimension on the edge of collapse, fractured by countless possibilities and timelines. As she descended, the once steady hum of her ship's engines began to warp, distorting in sync with the shifting quantum fields around her. The view through the cockpit window was unsettling. A kaleidoscope of overlapping realities, where cities blinked in and out of existence, and landscapes folded into one another like pages of an unfinished book. Some images appeared ancient, others futuristic, while a few seemed to be still in the process of being born. Tirana, in all its beauty, seemed so distant now, like a fleeting memory that was slowly slipping away from her grasp. Her heartbeat quickened as she realized the depth of the danger. If the Nexer controlled this nexus, they could rewrite not just Terraina's future, but every future, every timeline. As her ship landed on a barren, rocky outcrop in the heart of the shattered nexus, Alara prepared herself for what was to come. The entrance to the hidden temple, where the quantum gauntlet was said to be sealed, was located on the other side of this unstable realm. The guardians who once protected it were long gone, leaving only relics and echoes of their ancient civilization behind. The moment she stepped outside, the very ground beneath her feet seemed to ripple, shifting like water. The atmosphere was thick with temporal anomalies, making it hard to keep her bearings. For every step forward, it felt as though she took 2 steps back, as if time itself conspired to slow her down. She fought against the sensation, pushing forward with steady resolve. The air was thick with the weight of multiple realities colliding, and as she ventured deeper into the shattered nexus, Alara began to experience strange flashes, visions from different timelines. Some were of her own life, others of people she didn't recognize, yet their faces were familiar, like distant echoes from a past that might have been. She saw herself standing before a burning version of Starhelm, holding the quantum gauntlet, her face filled with despair. In another moment, she was leading a rebellion against the Nexar, but the battle was already lost, the skies dark with death. Each vision left her disoriented, as though the boundaries of who she was began to blur with the lives she might have lived. The weight of these alternate versions of herself began to take a toll. How could she trust her own decisions if they were only one of countless possibilities? The pull of these visions was strong, but Alara gritted her teeth and fought against them. She couldn't afford to be distracted. The gauntlet lay ahead, and every second spent lost in another timeline was one that brought the Nexar closer to victory. Just as she thought she had found her focus, a voice echoed through the shifting air, a familiar voice, but not her own. "Are you truly ready, Captain?" She spun, her hand instinctively reaching for the blaster at her side. Before her stood a version of herself, dressed in tattered combat gear, her face hardened by years of war. This version of Alara was older, more worn, her eyes hollow with the pain of loss. "You can't win," the other Alara said, her voice heavy with regret. "Not in this timeline, not in any timeline. The gauntlet is not meant to be wielded by anyone." Alara's heart raced. She had known the gauntlet was dangerous, but this was something else entirely. "Tell me why," Alara demanded, steadying herself. The older version of her smiled faintly, almost sadly. "Because even if you succeed, you'll lose everything you love. You'll become something else, a shadow of yourself." But before Alara could respond, the vision flickered and vanished, leaving only the oppressive stillness of the Nexus. It was clear now, the gauntlet was more than just a weapon. It was a doorway to something far greater, and far darker, than she had ever imagined. She pressed on, deeper into the heart of the Nexus, determined to find the gauntlet before the visions consumed her entirely. Alara reached the temple just as the fabric of the shattered Nexus began to warp around her. The once distinct lines of reality had blurred into a swirling mess of impossible shapes and sounds, like a song played out of tune. The Temple of the Gauntlet stood before her, an ancient structure built from materials that seemed to flicker between existence and non-existence. It was half in this world and half in another, existing across several timelines at once. She stepped forward, the air growing heavier with each passing second. As her boots hit the temple's steps, a strange hum resonated through her, vibrating deep within her chest. It was a sound that made her skin tingle, as if the temple itself was alive, breathing in time with her heartbeat. The doorway loomed in front of her, but before she could enter, a flash of light blinded her. When her vision cleared, she was no longer standing on the temple's steps. Instead, she found herself in a starkly different place. Starhelm, her city, but it was wrong. The streets were in ruins, broken and abandoned, smoke billowing from the remains of once great towers. The sky above was dark, shrouded in an eternal storm. A strange, cold wind howled through the streets, carrying with it the distant sounds of battle. Alara's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't a vision, it was happening. This was a possible future, one that was becoming more real with every passing second. She moved instinctively, running through the wreckage of the city, her heart pounding in her chest. She had to find the source of this destruction. As she rounded a corner, she was confronted by an enormous rift in space, a tear that stretched into infinity, swallowing everything in its wake. From the rift, Nexer forces poured through, endless, unstoppable. They had won. No, Alara whispered, her legs suddenly weak beneath her. The future she had fought so hard to prevent was unfolding before her eyes, and it felt all too real. Her hands trembled, and she clenched them into fists. She couldn't allow this to happen. She had to keep moving forward, no matter the cost. But just as she steeled herself for what was to come, another shift in the timeline swept her away. She was no longer in Starhelm. Now she was somewhere else. The new reality was calmer, almost peaceful, but it too was unsettling. She found herself standing in front of a younger version of herself. The woman before her had yet to become the hardened leader Alara had become, still filled with the raw idealism of youth. The younger Alara looked at her with wide, curious eyes, unrecognizing. "You're me, aren't you?" The younger Alara asked, her voice soft and tentative. "What's happened to you? Why do you look so broken?" The question hung in the air, and Alara could feel the weight of it pressing down on her. She had never imagined she would have to face herself like this. No, not just herself, but every version of herself. "I've made choices," Alara said quietly, her voice shaking slightly. "Choices that I thought were right, but sometimes they come with a price." The younger version of her tilted her head, eyes full of compassion. "You can still choose differently." The word struck her like a blow. What if it wasn't too late? What if she could still find a way to stop the Nexer, to protect her people without sacrificing everything? But before she could speak again, the scene dissolved around her, once more replaced by a new reality. Each vision left her feeling more fragmented, as if her identity was being pulled in every direction at once. But one thing remained constant: the gauntlet. She had to reach it before her fractured mind betrayed her. With every step she took, the Nexus tried to pull her into another reality, but Alara fought the temptation to stop. She couldn't allow herself to lose focus now. As she pushed forward, a low rumble filled the air, followed by a crackling sound. She turned to see a swirling rift opening behind her. The Nexar were coming. Time was running out. Alara sprinted through the shifting landscape of the shattered Nexus, her heart racing. Every step seemed to distort the world around her, as though the very act of moving caused new timelines to fracture and collapse. She could feel the weight of countless possible futures pressing down on her, each one pulling her in a different direction, trying to distract her from her mission. But she had no choice. The Nexar were coming, and with each passing second, the chances of success were slipping away. She reached the center of the Nexus, where the ruins of an ancient city sprawled out before her. This place, like everything else here, existed across multiple realities. Alara knew that the Gauntlet's power was bound to this very spot, hidden deep within the city's depths. But as she moved through the half-formed streets, she felt a strange presence, as if the city itself was watching her. Suddenly, a figure stepped out of the mist. At first, Alara thought it was a figment of her mind, another vision, another version of herself. But as the figure drew closer, the details solidified. It was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing the worn armor of a long-forgotten rebellion. His face was familiar but aged, marked by years of conflict. He was someone she'd never met, yet there was an undeniable connection. "You've come for the gauntlet," the man said, his voice low and gravelly. "You're not the first." Alara's pulse quickened. She recognized him now, not from her own timeline, but from one she had glimpsed in the Nexus. A version of herself, leading a rebellion against the Nexar, had once crossed paths with him. He had been a mentor to her, someone who taught her the ways of war and sacrifice. "Who are you?" Alara asked, trying to steady her breath. "How do you know what I seek?" The man smiled grimly, his eyes reflecting the same weariness she saw in her own reflection. "I'm someone who failed. I was a part of the rebellion in another life. We tried to stop the Nexar, but we didn't have the gauntlet. And now," he trailed off, looking around at the crumbling city. "Now, this is all that's left." Alara shook her head, determination hardening within her. "I can stop them. I have to." The man's expression softened, as if he understood all too well the weight of her words. "I can help, but you need to understand, wielding the gauntlet doesn't just give you power. It changes you. It changes everything. You might think you're saving your world, but at what cost?" Before Alara could respond, another figure emerged from the mist. A being so ancient, its form seemed to shimmer between solid and ethereal. It was as though the very concept of time had taken shape in this entity, a being who existed beyond the reach of mortal comprehension. Its eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, and its presence exuded an aura of infinite knowledge. "I have watched your journey, Captain Alara Quinn," the entity spoke, its voice both familiar and distant. "The Nexar seek to control time itself, but they are not the true threat to the multiverse. The true enemy is the desire for control, the belief that one can reshape all realities to suit their will." Alara's instincts screamed that this being was important, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. "And what would you have me do?" The entity tilted its head, considering her question. "You are not the first to seek the gauntlet, and you will not be the last. But the decision you make will echo through all timelines. Choose wisely, for the gauntlet does not just change your future, it erases all the possibilities of what could have been." The air thickened with tension as the two figures, one a failed warrior from another timeline, the other an ancient entity beyond comprehension, stood before Alara. Each offered their knowledge, their power, but neither had the answer she sought. Alara knew she could not do this alone. "I can't do this without help," Alara said finally, her voice steady despite the chaos of thoughts racing through her mind. "I need both of you. We can defeat the Nexar together." The man, the warrior of the rebellion, nodded grimly. "We don't have much time, but I'm with you, whatever the cost." The ancient entity's form shifted, its essence seeming to ripple through space and time. "Then let us begin. Together, we will face the storm." Alara nodded, feeling the weight of her decision settling in. Allies from different realities, each bound by their own struggles, had come together for a common cause. But the road ahead was uncertain, and the battle for the gauntlet would require more than strength. It would demand sacrifices that none of them could foresee. The moment Alara's new allies had joined her, the very air around them seemed to tremble with the energy of infinite possibilities. The ancient entity, whose name was unknown, but whose presence resonated across time, gestured toward the heart of the shattered nexus. In its infinite wisdom, it knew that the battle for the quantum gauntlet was not merely a war of force, but of perception, of bending the rules of reality itself. Alara felt the weight of their mission press down on her, a burden she could not carry alone. The Nexar were already massing their forces on the outskirts of the Nexus, their technology pulsating through the fabric of time, like a malevolent thread attempting to stitch itself into the multiverse. The entity spoke again, its voice echoing through their minds, as if it came from everywhere and nowhere at once. "To defeat the Nexar, you must wage a war across all timelines. Every reality, every possibility must be considered. They fight by altering outcomes, creating paradoxes that weave through existence. But you must embrace the chaos and use it against them." Alara nodded, understanding the magnitude of what was being asked. If the Nexar controlled time, then the only way to defeat them was to outmaneuver them across every possible version of reality. This battle was not just a physical one. It was a mental, metaphysical war that would transcend anything she had ever fought before. Her rebellion mentor, the battle-hardened man who had failed in his own timeline, spoke with a quiet but firm resolve. "We'll need to coordinate across multiple realities, using the Gauntlet's power to stabilize our forces. We can't afford to fight in just one reality, not if we hope to stop them." The air hummed as the ancient entity extended its ethereal form, linking them to the infinite timelines that stretched out like a tangled web. Alara could feel the shifting flow of time, the possibilities unfolding before her in an overwhelming rush. Every choice, every action taken would ripple through the multiverse, creating echoes of change that could either save or doom their cause. Together, they gathered their forces. Alara's rebellion mentor summoned the warriors from his timeline, a fierce and loyal group who had once stood by his side, now resurrected by the entity's power and ready to fight again. The warriors were a diverse group, each one an expert in their field. Tacticians, engineers, and soldiers who had spent years resisting the Nexer's control. They had failed before, but now they were given a second chance, a chance to right their past mistakes. The entity, too, summoned allies from distant corners of the multiverse, beings that existed beyond time, ancient entities of immense power who had long ago faded from mortal memory. Their forms were incomprehensible to Alara, shifting and flickering as they materialized. They were the forgotten gods of lost realities, and together, they would fight alongside Alara and her allies. The first wave of the Nexar appeared, warships materializing from the rifts in space-time, their dark forms blotting out the stars. Alara's forces, now armed with the knowledge of how to manipulate the flow of time, launched their assault from multiple realities at once. Every strike they made, every move they executed, was an alteration in the timeline, a divergence, a ripple in the fabric of existence that kept the Nexar off balance. But the Nexar were not without their own mastery over the multiverse. They began to fight back, creating fractures in time that bent the very laws of physics. Alara watched as one of her soldiers disappeared before her eyes, swallowed by a rift in space-time, his body flickering between moments. Another moment later, he reappeared, but in a different form, his body twisted by the Nexar's dark energy, now a weapon for their cause. "No one is immune," her rebellion mentor said grimly, watching the soldier's transformation. "The Nexar don't just fight, they rewrite you." But Alara refused to let fear take root. The gauntlet was the key, and she had to reach it. Through the chaos, she could feel it calling to her, its power resonating through every timeline, every reality, urging her forward. She pushed ahead, leading the charge, her mind focused on one goal: to wield the gauntlet and use its power to bring an end to this war. As her forces clashed with the Nexar, the skies above the shattered nexus cracked open, revealing the heart of the battle. Time itself hung in the balance, and the war that would decide the fate of all existence was about to reach its boiling point. The quantum war had begun. The battle raged across the multiverse, its intensity growing with every passing moment. Alara's forces, bolstered by the ancient entity and the battle-hardened rebels, were locked in a fierce struggle against the Nexar. But as the fighting escalated, the once clear path to victory began to blur. Time itself felt like it was being torn apart, with every timeline folding into another, each victory followed by a loss in an alternate reality. Alara could feel the power of the quantum gauntlet calling to her, its presence tugging at the very core of her being. It was within reach, its energies rippling through the fabric of the nexus. But as she moved closer, a voice echoed in her mind, one she knew all too well. "You still don't understand, do you?" It was her own voice, but it was different, darker, more conflicted. She turned, finding herself face to face with a version of herself that was twisted by the very power they sought to control. This version of Alara was consumed by the Gauntlet's potential, its dark influence erasing her humanity, turning her into a being of pure will, unbound by the limitations of time. "You will never win, not as you are," the dark version of herself said, stepping forward. "You seek to save everything, but the truth is that you can't. The gauntlet only leads to destruction. You think you can control it, but in the end, it controls you." Alara's heart pounded in her chest. She knew what this version of herself meant. The gauntlet's power was seductive, and if she gave in, it would rewrite her fate, erasing the very person she had worked so hard to become. It would reshape her into something she couldn't control, something unrecognizable. The entity that had guided them through the battle now appeared beside her, its presence overwhelming. The gauntlet is both a tool and a curse. It can alter reality, but at a cost. Each decision you make will echo across time. You must choose, reshape the multiverse and risk your soul, or destroy the gauntlet and let the Nexer win. Alara's mind raced. The weight of the decision threatened to crush her. If she used the gauntlet, she could end the war, defeat the Nexer, and restore peace to her people. But what would that cost? What would it do to her? She had already seen glimpses of herself twisted by the gauntlet's power, and it filled her with dread. The rebellion leader, the man who had once fought alongside her in another timeline, placed a hand on her shoulder. "Whatever choice you make, I trust you. We've all sacrificed so much, but we can't let one person, one choice, destroy everything." Alara turned to face him, then to the ancient entity. The time for indecision had passed. She had to make the final choice. She was the only one who could. With a deep breath, she stepped forward, toward the gauntlet. As her hand hovered over it, she felt the weight of every timeline, every possibility, pressing in on her, but she knew what she had to do. She would not allow the gauntlet to consume her. With a cry of determination, she tore it from its pedestal, but rather than using its power to reshape reality, she focused every ounce of her will into destroying it. The gauntlet shattered, the explosion of energy rippling through the Nexus, sending shockwaves across every timeline. For a moment, everything went silent. Then, slowly, the Nexus began to heal, the rifts closing and the warships vanishing. The Nexer, unable to manipulate time without the gauntlet, were cast back into the void, defeated by the very power they sought to control. Alara collapsed to her knees, exhausted but relieved. She had made the final choice. She had sacrificed the gauntlet, and in doing so, had saved the multiverse, not through control, but through restraint. The ancient entity faded, its task complete, and the rebellion leader offered her a hand. "You did it. We all did." Alara nodded, her eyes weary but filled with hope. The multiverse had been spared, but the cost had been high. She had learned that true power didn't lie in control, but in the ability to let go, to make the right choices, even when they seemed impossible. As the sun began to rise over the newly restored realities, Alara felt a quiet peace settle over her. The battle was over, the final choice had been made, and the future, for the first time in a long while, seemed bright.